Hello and welcome, everybody, or good afternoon if you're in the UK, and if you're joining us from somewhere else in the world, good morning or good evening. As you may have noticed, I'm not Martin Gill. He's on the other side of the world from us for the New Zealand OSPAs, which is being held tomorrow. So I'm Tom Reeve. I'm the event producer for the Cyber OSPAs. And welcome to this, our 183rd Thought Leadership webinar. So the idea of these thought leadership webinars is to critique an area of security to create better security for today and tomorrow. And we're covering new topics all the time, but today we're going to be talking about a subject that crops up again and again. How secure are the smart devices that we rely upon to secure our businesses? So on the one hand, smart devices add a great deal of functionality and automate many of the repetitive security tasks that used to take a lot of labor. And on the other hand, cybersecurity weaknesses in these devices can leave an organization vulnerable in new ways. So how common are these security gaps and how serious are they? And where can we look for remedies? As usual, we have some experts who joined us today to shed light on this topic. And in a moment, I'll ask them to make an opening statement, and then we'll be coming to you, the audience, to ask questions. So get those questions ready. To ask a question, use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Get your questions in early. Be sure to include your name, and it'd be great if you could tell us where you're listening from as well. Then as soon as the opening statements are concluded, we'll come to the questions and incorporate those into our discussion. So first though, let's quickly meet our panelists for today's session. We've got Holly, Ian, and Leon. And I'll just hand over to Holly, please.
Hiya, I'm Holly Hennessy. I lead the IoT Cybersecurity Intelligence Service at Omdia, which is the research arm of Informatech. I cover all areas of the market when it comes to IoT, including physical security devices, trends, technologies, challenges, and drivers for organizations, and work alongside the rest of the cybersecurity market group, which includes Black Hat and dark reading.
Fantastic. Thank you, Holly. And over to Ian, please.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ian Cundy. I'm the CEO of Section 20 Solutions. I've spent much of my career in the physical electronic security industry. Mainly that was around the IP transition. And then I worked in the inception of Internet of Things and smart building technology. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about the developments.
Fantastic, thanks, Ian. And Leon.
Yes, hello, everybody. My name is Leon Molchanovsky, and I'm the CEO of a boutique consultancy called Galaxy Innovation. We focus on cybersecurity of cyber physical systems. My experience and background is also in cyber physical systems over 20 years. And we worked across the spectrum of technologies in many different countries and many different applications. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Leon. And so now, as I said, we're just going to ask each of our panelists to introduce the subject in their own words, and then we'll be going to the Q&A. So just a reminder, get those questions in now. I can see some already starting to come in, but first over to Holly.
Awesome, thank you. So what I wanted to kind of talk about first is one of the research projects that I recently did. Within the cybersecurity team, we speak to hundreds of CISOs throughout the year regularly, and we also run decision maker surveys. So this is where we kind of ask about the challenges, the drivers, pain points, issues that are kind of cropping up. And I run the IoT cybersecurity one. But something that stood out to me in last year's survey, so this was just before Black Hat USA in the summer last year was one point. And we asked essentially what's the most commonly used device in organizations, and that was video cameras. So obviously that falls into physical security, and across all organizations globally that we spoke to, video cameras were the most common. And I think what's interesting and what's important in like this discussion is that they're not incredibly secure. So there's no indication or assurance that these devices are going to be enterprise grade. You could be a small organization or a small enterprise using a device which is essentially just basic consumer use, which has usually even worse security. And there's constantly vulnerabilities cropping up with these devices as well. Even a kind of quick Google will pop up for various vulnerabilities and CVEs around physical security devices. Alongside that, and something that crops up in my research quite a lot, is there's almost a misconception about connected devices and how secure they are. So even some of the CISOs, so the Chief Information Security Officers answering some of the interviews that I do, would say that IoT devices are secure enough. So there's no need to kind of implement further tools and things like that, which is quite worrying, I think. It's a higher percentage than I expected. I think it was 24% of CISOs had that point of view. So I think there's definitely an education piece that needs to happen, whether that's among kind of the security industry. It needs to get a lot more focused than it kind of gets with IoT in general, and physical security fitting into that kind of area. But it's also from the other side as well. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of regulation in this area, but governments do need to kind of push this, and there needs to be a lot more work done on that other side to ensure that if you are an organization and you're implementing these devices, you want the benefits of physical security, of smart devices in the organization, that you should be able to purchase them and implement them and kind of expect at least some basic level of security by design. So yeah, it's kind of working from both sides, both on the education inside the organization and these kind of external influences that can really help solve the problem.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Holly. And let me go to Ian.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I was just really happy to talk about the transition from analog to IP that the industry's undergone really in the last 10 to 15 years now. It's been amazingly, essentially what occurred was it was an analog industry which had to become IP. We didn't have to overcomplicate networks and their design because the industry wasn't in a state where it could handle that. So most data networks now in buildings, businesses, even government, really are built on very insecure network topologies. Things have obviously moved on. We have very simple ways of bypassing initial security systems. We perform what we call red team pen testing, so we combine physical access with a site and actually prove that it can then work around the existing security standards. So simple devices like these have been around many years, £7-8 on the internet, enables you to copy the existing access control protocols and then rewrite those to a different card. And I'm sure some of you are putting 2 and 2 together that would be a very bad thing if that was, for instance, your CFO's card or your IT director's card. It would then give that person access to behave as that person within your estate. So these devices have been around on Hacker and RF1 sites for many, many years. But in the recent months, we've had a product hit the market called the Flipper. Now that's really changed the game in terms of IoT and existing device security. And anything with really a physical attack surface, so a physical digital device, has really had its vulnerabilities changed into a kind of a commoditized situation now. I always like to say, the iPhone was never the first phone to do email, but it was the one that got my dad using email on the phone. So it's that kind of transition that's going on out there with this tool at the moment. And a simple Google will show you how to use it for very nefarious purposes. At the moment, it's been, touted as a testing device, but the impact on people's existing estates really should be looked into, and manufacturers really need to be aware that there is a problem with this technology, whether it be your access to your building, whether it be access to control systems for your HVAC, your lighting, which could actually disable your entire operation. I know everyone's obviously focused in terms of cyber around data security and caring about money, but the truth is people's lives could be at risk. And at the moment, this is not an exploited area. 94% of all cyber attacks still come in via email. So while it's so easy to get people to give you their Office 365 password, nobody really needs to focus on this. But what my business is there for is when people do start to actually get affected by it and held to physical ransom with devices like Flipper. We have some great tools, whether it be physical network separation using advanced military technologies, right through to the world's most advanced artificial intelligence platform that can respond in under a second. So we have real world answers to the problems that are out there. As Holly rightly said, the standards are there, but they're not really going far enough at the moment. There isn't universal buy-in from the people that there needs to be. And whilst IoT devices are being shipped out with PKI keys on them and copy and pasted code from the internet, we really aren't doing ourselves any favor building these systems on sand. So that's really what I wanted everyone to research and kind of open their ears to, really. It's an important issue, and we need to care now, I think.
Excellent. Okay, fantastic introduction. Thank you, Ian. And let us now go to Leon, please.
Ian just mentioned this journey from the analog world to the digital world. And I remember when 20 years ago, I worked for a vendor. We manufactured cameras, DVRs, and other kits. A client complained, how come my password and admin password became known to somebody else? And it turned out we just hard-coded the password into the SQL database. That was an overlook, and engineers didn't think about the risks involved. So 20 years later, a big IT company, when asked why do you not authenticate your IoT devices and how do you secure them, said the clients, they don't ask us to do that. And therefore, product managers, they did not bother to integrate any cybersecurity functionality into the hardware. So that's where the world we live in now. There are so many vendors, so many devices, different types. How a user can ensure that what they buy and install and integrate will be secure, not an easy job. So this is one of the biggest challenges in my mind, this diversity of vendors, platforms, technologies. It's difficult to integrate them and make them work together, but even more difficult to make them secure. And then to solve that challenge, on the one hand, there are different initiatives trying to build standards, IoT standards, and there are already a dozen or so, maybe more, different initiatives how to secure IoT devices or systems. But still, there are quite a few of them, and they approach the problem differently. And that does not really help a client, an end user, because A, which standard to use, B, how to implement it internally. And that's where, well, we work. And I will encourage everybody who works in physical security to ask themselves a question. Which devices they have, how secure they are, do we know how those devices are secured, where they're procured, how suppliers handle security, how we provision, personalize them, and monitor them. And perhaps you will be surprised at possible risks that brings. And what Ian just mentioned, using that copy device, cloning a smart card, takes a few seconds. And imagine somebody does that and comes inside and uses a USB stick to connect to a network. That will be disaster. Same can be said about CCTV cameras, different onboard devices, and CCTV cameras processing PII naturally carries a lot of compliance risks. 4% of the global revenue is at stake if fined. So securing personal information data as well is important, as well as many other challenges that the business faces. So my suggestion for this half hour is to talk about different situations and different challenges, and how we can perhaps assist you, suggest approaches to solve them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leon. Excellent introduction there. So we've got questions coming in from the audience. So do keep those coming in via the Q&A. So I wanted to go to Ian, if I could first, with a question, which is, really looking at the end user's perspective on this. End user installs, end users are installing a lot of security devices to make their buildings more secure and to reduce the amount of labor that they need to spend on securing their buildings. But these are opening up vulnerabilities. These devices are vulnerable, and they're opening up vulnerabilities within the networks as well, to their wider networks. But my question really is, to what extent is it their fault, and what should they be doing, at a fundamental level to prevent this? Do they have visibility over the extent of the problem, and what do they need to be doing?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is a real evolution. I mean, someone's rightly said on the chat, we have had these kind of RFID hacking tools available for a long time, and rightly so. Yes, they've been around. But as I rightly said, this is a commoditization now that's making people see this as a cool gadget. It's almost like a Tamagotchi device. It's a very small device, battery powered, very capable of handling the standards across all of the standards that we're used to in terms of the MIFARE and 125 kilohertz cards. So, this is something that's out of the box, has functionality to interact with that. There is, of course, a massive homebrew community now of people developing open source apps, using platforms like ChatGPT. We can all do code now. So you can essentially tell it what you want. It will create the code. You can download that onto your Flipper device. You can add additional hardware modules and things for things like Bluetooth and IoT platforms like LoRaWAN. So it's really a very capable tool in terms of everything in one box. It's fairly low cost. It's being touted for computer science students at colleges. People are getting it and then realizing the fun aspects as well.
And so Ian, I mean, to what extent is this the fault of the end users for not getting to grips with this?
I don't think you can really blame people in terms, when an encryption standard is broken, we have to go for the next one along. And that's really the evolution of security, that security doesn't exist. There's a perception of security, and you can always one-up it. And essentially, if it can be designed by a human, it can be broken by a human, has been the proven fact over the history. So, you've got to go with the industry, and as things evolve, as software becomes more powerful, as GPUs get more powerful, everything becomes breakable at the end of the day. So I don't think you can really blame people, but certainly, we're all aware that certain technologies have aged. Pass cards wearing around your neck at the bus stop for everyone to see where you work and to steal has never really been a particularly smart way to do it. So it's been due for an evolution. That was going towards the BLE kind of smart apps on your phone, which again gives you attack surfaces as an attacker. What we look for is digital assets that we can actually gain access to. So if there is a digital card reader there, that means it has something to interface with. So if you have a device to interface with it, you can do that. You know, there are some access control companies out there right now that have taken away the readers altogether and abstracted to things like QR codes. So a QR code can't physically be hacked, and the security at their cloud layer is absolutely brilliant. So again, it's a very difficult platform to then attack. So they've done that as an evolution in the industry. Not every big company is doing that. Obviously, at the moment, they're still installing the older systems today as we speak. So people aren't aware that how commoditized it is. People aren't aware that the flipper can open a Tesla's charge port as it's driving along, for instance. You know, quite what the security threat is around that, we don't know yet. But at the moment, it's a lot of fun for the people that are playing with it and using their coding ability to really expand and take it into directions that the manufacturers would never have thought of, even the manufacturers of that device.
Right, which, okay, well, interesting, very, very, very interesting there, Ian. I mean, the brings me neatly to my next question, which I wanted to direct to Leon, if I could. Which is, I mean, kind of similar sort of question. As we're seeing the security threats evolving, you know, to what extent is this the responsibility of the manufacturers to respond, and are they stepping up to the challenge? You know, are they doing the job of securing these devices, but also educating the end users in how to ensure these devices are secure?
Well, we live in a market world, and therefore manufacturers, they are primarily driven by their profits or rather corporate priorities. If the clients, the market do not demand security, then why should they bother? My take is that if there is demand, requests, and clients tell manufacturers, vendors, we want security, then at some point in time they will follow. The problem I see is that still many clients, they don't think enough about this, and they do not put pressure on manufacturers. And in some segments, manufacturers, they may have too strong market power, and they say, well, you don't have an alternative but to work with us because we have something unique, good, and our products were chosen not because of security, they were chosen because they do something good, say industrial control, analytics, or whatever. And I would say that the market, customers, users, once they looked into this, they go to manufacturers and tell them, look, we want to understand what you're supplying us. Show us your security posture, your processes, how you provision devices, where the keys are coming from, how they're generated, which encryption algorithms you use, which hardware you use, and if necessary, go to their suppliers. And I think in the UK, the Supplier Act actually demands that in the telecom space. And then manufacturers will be forced not only to think more about it, but also to become open, transparent, and provide adequate information as to what they can do and what they don't do. And based on that, then it's possible to take some actions as to, say, segment devices, not to buy them at all, or customize them.
Right, right, okay. So, and do we feel that, I mean, I'm thinking in particular about the vulnerability of CCTV cameras that are made by some companies such as Hikvision and Dahua that have been mentioned. You know, they've been in the news a lot. You know, do we feel that those pose a vulnerability that, you know, that customers are, you sort of talked about, mentioned this, but the customers are willing to overlook the because of the price, they're willing to purchase these products despite the security concerns?
Well, yes, price or functionality, business priorities often drive decisions, and security comes along later. But then I would not single out any specific vendor per se. I think we should be objective, and we shouldn't have any bias against anybody. And as such, decisions should be based on facts. And perhaps there are better vendors and there are worse vendors elsewhere. But the point is that depends on the application. If it's a, I don't know, a garage, why not to use such a camera? Maybe it's not that important. If it's a CNI, naturally, you should do some due diligence. And I doubt that any single vendor will provide a secure solution straight out of the box. It will still be necessary to analyze it, configure it properly, integrate it, and security is a team sport, and therefore it's not one piece which will make the system secure.
Right. Okay. Yes. Okay. Excellent. Excellent point, Leon. It's the entire ecosystem that these devices exist in that makes the difference in terms of security of organizations. So I mean, sort of continuing on this kind of focus on devices and manufacturers, I wonder, Holly, whether there's a feeling that the regulation and the standards, and you've spoken about this, aren't up to the level that they need to be. We've seen various reports that have come out from UK government and other governments about the insecurity of devices, but there's been a kind of would you say there's been an adequate response to those reports that have been coming out?
Yeah, I would say when it comes to regulation, IoT, cybersecurity, in which physical security would usually fall into if it's connected, is really behind. So the thing is, this year has seen a lot of activity. Last year has seen an incredible amount of activity. I'd personally say that next year is the year when we might start seeing some movement with manufacturers implementing standardization a bit more, and the regulatory pressure comes down a bit more. At the minute, there isn't really any regulation. So in the UK, there was the PSTI bill, which essentially uses the most widely used standard as a baseline, which is the ETSI EN 303645. And that bill essentially has been passed into an act now, but this isn't enforced right now, essentially. So it's still kind of like this middle ground period where nothing's actually being enforced, but the kind of principles are there. In terms of globally, I would say the vast majority are using the EN 303645, which is good. It shows some kind of uniformity, but I would say that in general, I think this was mentioned earlier, it's hugely fragmented. Regardless of each kind of government saying, okay, we're going to adhere to this, there's no kind of one standard to look to. There still is the NIST standard, which is heavily used in the US. There's the ISO standard as well, which is used by some countries, some organizations. So there's nothing really that can say, okay, this is the way forward. When it comes to the standards, the most widely used one itself, and how this is developing into regulation, unfortunately, it's really basic. So it's the top 3 requirements of the standard that most governments are essentially going to regulate or are looking to regulate at the minute, which is no default passwords, so a ban on default passwords, transparency around security updates, so letting the consumer or organization or whoever's purchasing this device know how long the device is going to get security updates for, and also allowing clear vulnerability disclosure for security researchers to essentially tell that manufacturer, there's a vulnerability here, you need to fix it. But there are other requirements in the standard. There's the communication layer, there's the application layer, there's the security within the device, the embedded security within the device. So there's so many other elements to cybersecurity of devices that aren't touched on what's being picked up in regulation. It's necessary. Like, this is obviously a good thing. Those three elements should be in place now. Realistically, most people may think they already are in place. Maybe if you're purchasing a device, you're going to assume, oh, okay, well, if there's a problem with it, I'm sure the manufacturer will know. Not necessarily. There's been some work done by other researchers who have looked at kind of major manufacturers in the space, and they've kind of pulled together all the information to kind of see, okay, who would pass the regulation now. And lots of manufacturers wouldn't even meet the regulation at this point in time. They're not even doing these three very basic things. And I mean, there's definitely potential for other elements of standardization to be implemented into regulation at some point. The great thing about the Act in the UK is that the Act has been passed, which allows any of those 13 requirements to be put into law at a given time. So say, for example, in the future, people start to think, or governments start to think, okay, you know what, we really need to secure the communication layer or the application layer or another element within the realm of IoT cybersecurity. They don't need to go through this whole dragged out long process of implementing the Act again. It's the provisions there. So that's something positive for the future. But essentially right now it's highly fragmented. There's nothing that's kind of in place right now that's putting pressure on manufacturers. Even if there was, I think it's really important to note that standardization and regulation isn't going to fix things. It's not going to just be like this magic kind of fix all solution. Even with regulation in place, there are still going to be vulnerabilities. It's like a moving target. There's, even if you kind of secure by design and you produce a device which has cybersecurity built in as best as it can be, there could still be a vulnerability. There could still be another issue which could essentially compromise that device and, you know, affect the organization in turn. So obviously there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that is being done. It's in such a great position compared to what it was a few years ago. But yeah, that's kind of how I see the state of it today.
All right. Oh, excellent. I mean, that's a really good overview of the regulation and standards situation that we're in at the moment. I was going to was looking at one of the papers from the IoT Security Foundation. Their IoT cybersecurity for facilities professionals. And one of the issues that they bring up there, which I think links in very much to what you were saying, Holly, about you know, the need to you know, this is a changing, you know, constantly moving situation. But for facilities professionals, their advice is that you need to have, you know, real sight of the risks and devices on your network and review them on a regular basis. And I was just thinking, I mean, this is something that we've chatted about in the past, Ian, you know, about this. And I'm wondering what's, you know, how often, to what extent are organizations not doing this, do you feel? And what do they need to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have this shadow IT issue where, you know, certain users will always see it as kind of not an issue. As you say, what issue would it be to put your fish tank IoT thermometer on a corporate network? You know, that wouldn't harm anyone. But we all know the stories about where that led to massive breaches. So, you know, it is a constant assessment. You know, IT departments are never in a situation where they've got spare resource or spare budget. So the issue has always been, you know, if I turn up at an organization which is currently looking after 10,000 IT devices with a team of 5 guys, if you then suddenly say, well, actually, you're responsible for another 26,000 IoT and smart devices, which all have a network IP address and can all be breached and cause you the same data protection nightmare, then that's a real challenge for them. You know, what do they say at that point? Unless you've got a solution to that problem, you know, automating that response to those changes and that ever-moving target is just the only way we can do it. You know, we always say that humans have lost the battle in cybersecurity. You know, we're at the point now where we really have to outsource a lot of that work to give us real actionable data, because we can't be there at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning when all the manufacturing devices get ransomwared. We just can't have IT departments sat there waiting to respond to all these things. So it needs to be managed in the right way. You know, the standards are a great start, but my worry is that people then get complacent. You know, they think, oh, okay, well, I've ticked the box. You know, the amount of people that I speak to that say, well, I've done cyber essentials. Okay, well, that's great as a start, but there's a lot that doesn't cover, and there's a lot more risk beyond that. But there's this kind of blasé approach to it, that it won't happen to us, and that we won't lose our manufacturing systems, which have been connected now for what, 15 years. You know, we really need to start taking this stuff seriously. And the challenge is for us, you know, with all this stuff, if we actually get to test it, the last CPNI approved product we tested, our tester broke it in 6 seconds. And that's beyond what we've been talking about on this call. So approval means nothing to us.
Interesting, Ian, very interesting. So and Leon, I mean, I've got a question here from Jay Jordan. He asks, do you feel there's a lack of synergy between system managers and physical security practitioners? So looking at the physical security side of things.
When you say system managers, I presume IT system managers, yes, and physical
I think
security?
We can assume that, yeah.
Well, sure, there is lack of, they definitely talk if they work in the same organization, but they probably talk different language, or they have different priorities. Just one of the recent examples is when a big facility manager in a big building manager had a number of clients, corporate clients, and naturally there were plenty of IoT devices installed in the building, BMS and other things. And then it's not only IT department talking to facility managers, it's also one IT department, one facility managers department talking to their client, equal departments. And they all have different priorities. And ultimately, it all boils down to who is responsible for what. And as it happens in big corporations, they're still siloed. And that is my job. I run the building, or I maintain, I don't know, cooling system. And I know nothing about security, but let me do my job. And then IT department says, well, that's not an IT kit, and that's not on the network, or maybe if it is on a network, we'll segment it and the job is done. So naturally, there should be more synergy, and that should come down from perhaps the top, and the top not necessarily from CISO or physical security executives, but perhaps from the executives, where they try to remove silos, and they should be cross-departmental teams that will work together to achieve that ultimate goal, to provide as much security as possible. But the short answer is yes, there is lack of communication. They still live in their own independent worlds. And I think the technology just comes to us and forces us to talk more to each other. And depending on the organizational culture, that process is easier or not so.
Right, excellent, excellent, Leon. I've got another question here from Simon Cham. Makes the point that the speed and breadth of development in cyber suggests that security can never be wholly reliant on cyber solution, but has to include a physical element within all potential access points. And I just wonder, I don't know, going to you, Ian, would you agree with that, or do you think we can rely on those cyber devices?
Yeah, I think Leon referred to it earlier, that, you know, we need a scalability in terms of security. You know, that a CNI site is different to the corner shop, but we never really understand how all of this data coming together can really be used by, you know, foreign parties to kind of control and understand our behaviors for lots of reasons. So for me, I think it is worth taking steps to protect assets. There's a lot of challenges in terms of even energy delivery. How do we protect energy distribution sites at the moment? It's kind of crazy that all this stuff gets stolen and gets vandalized and everything else. So there is definitely physical challenges. There are definitely technology advancements with RFID tagging, smart waters, all the things we've worked with for years that we really need to bring into the cyberspace. There's no point having a data center if someone can walk into it. So, yes, you absolutely need to take responsibility, but at the same time, it needs to be a scalable approach that's realistic to the client.
Right. We've had a couple of questions in here about training. And there's obviously always the people element in any of this. And I suppose I'm just wondering, I'm looking at Holly, wondering whether you had any comment on the training element of this, and whether there's anything that needed to be done from a regulatory point on that.
Yeah, I would say it's interesting when you're kind of looking at responsibility and training and things like that, and who needs to do what in the cybersecurity space. And there's, on one hand, it's kind of like, yeah, an enterprise should be able to expect a decent level of security from the products that they're in, or devices that they're implementing. But on the other hand, I do think that there is responsibility on the enterprise side as well. So this, as kind of mentioned, yeah, if you're a corner shop, or if you're a energy facility, you're going to be having to deal with different requirements. If you are, say, an energy facility, you've got your own specific regulations to deal with, above and beyond, like a general enterprise would have to deal with. So there's definitely processes that need to be put in place and demonstrated in order to meet compliance and regulation. But I don't think that it can really be like, you don't want it to be a tick box exercise, essentially. So you could follow like the compliance requirements and say, okay, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, but it doesn't always necessarily help with resilience. So essentially, if there is a bad worst case scenario and there's a breach or an attack and something happens, just following compliance doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to bounce back as effectively as possible, and you're going to be able to kind of minimize the impact as effectively as possible, depending on what kind of standard or whatever you're following. But I think part of the overall enterprise cybersecurity should be looking at technology, people, and process, right? That's the kind of three elements to kind of look at in general, and people is 100% in there. I think that we've mentioned kind of physical security, cybersecurity, but a huge other element of it is going to be employee training as well. It's things like we've been mentioned as well, how you can have kind of like red team exercises where someone's physically in the office, trying to see how far they can get, and that is definitely kind of an issue that can happen. And when these things happen, like a lot of the times you see these reports, or you hear reports where an employee has just kind of let someone in the door or left their laptop unlocked and things like this. Obviously it's not going to be as big a kind of impact if it's in a small shop down the road, but yeah, it definitely depends on the organization. But I think if you have kind of, if you're seeing issues within your InfoSec team, and there's kind of data breaches, or you're getting attempts at kind of like hacking, things like that, it's definitely a necessity to be trying to looking internally as well, which can also be an issue. I don't think that it's ever going to be an employee's fault, but there is definitely things that can be done to try to bridge those gaps and educate everybody.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Holly. Holly, Ian, Leon, we could go on. We have looked at this. It's been a very fast skate through this subject. We look at this at the device level, the system level, and the regulatory and standards level, and we could probably talk for hours on each of those different areas. Questions today have been excellent, and we've gotten, I think, gained some invaluable insight into our topic today. So just a few final comments from me, just to say that we have coming up, we have a call for, as you can see on your screen, we've got the call for nominations for the OSPAs South Africa ones are closing in just a few days on the 18th of April, and you can see the closing dates for the other ones, including the Romanian OSPAs, which are coming up very shortly. Then in addition, we've got the New Zealand OSPAs Award presentation, which is happening tomorrow. As I mentioned, Martin Gill is in New Zealand for that right now, and we've got the Ireland OSPAs coming up next month. We'll, if you would like to come and see us, we're going to be on the road at the security event, 25th to the 27th of April in Birmingham, stand 4 M40. So drop by, say hello. And we've got another thought leadership webinar coming up in 2 weeks' time. How are you measuring EDI against business performance? And what are the real benefits to your organization? There are plenty of real benefits. Come along and find out what those are. So again, I just want to say a big thank you to our panelists, Holly, Ian, and Leon, and to you, our audience, for listening and asking your questions. We appreciate it. If Martin were here, he would conclude by saying, wherever you are in the world, stay safe. And until we meet again, goodbye.